Hi, and welcome to the show. My guest today has interviewed and interacted with dozens of the world's business leaders and policymakers. He has moderated high-level roundtables for the United Nations, the World Bank, the Stock Exchange of East Africa, and the ICT sector in Kenya, but is probably best known as the business editor and host of various business shows at Nation TV in Kenya. Wallace Kantai, welcome to The Scoop. Wallace, it's great to have you
Thanks,
here.
Salim. Good to see you.
Thank you for your time and for coming by. Wallace, business is your passion now, but it's not what you studied in school. You did government and you did history. Where did the love for business come in?
It's sort of a strange question because I was going to say it's a strange question. But when I was interviewing for my current job at NTV, at the Nation Media Group, and the classic question is asked, tell us about yourself. And when I started answering that question, I realized that it actually doesn't make sense if you think about it from that perspective, because I studied one thing. My career, short as it is, has been all sorts of different things. But in particular answer to your question, I can actually tell you the day I got interested in business journalism. It's because of an article that I read in Newsweek magazine back in 1995. You know, I was 17 at the time, and I read this thing about Disney, the American company, taking over capital cities ABC, ABC, the channel. And for me, it was such a fascinating story, just purely fascinating from the way it was being told, the personalities that were involved. And I realized the numbers didn't actually count in that story. It was just simply the dynamics of it and how they started thinking about taking each other over and all that sort of thing. And since then, I started hunting now all sorts of articles I could get, CNN and that sort of thing, watching business programs.
Articles that humanized
Exactly.
business, that made it about people as opposed to numbers.
And till today, and I'll give you a secret, till today, numbers still don't do it for me. I'm not going to sit down and read a balance sheet and go, wow. No, for me, it's just numbers across a page. Because the numbers, behind the numbers is actually a human story, you know. Well, there's a story of profit or loss, there's a story of the products that you're trying to sell or whatever it is. Those numbers are simply a representation of something else. And for me, the something else is where the fascination is with business journalism.
You told me when we were talking before we started that you left school at 15. And
Yeah.
you didn't leave because you left and dropped out. You left because you graduated and finished your high school at the age of 15. Are you a boy genius, or was it just hard work?
I wish I was. But true story, and this story, no one ever believes it, but it's a fact of life. We moved to Kisumu, that's on Lake Victoria, when I was 5 years old. Yes, I was 5 years old. So we moved there in January, and the Kenyan school year starts in January. So when we moved, my mom had to very quickly find schools for us, my brother and I. My brother's a year older than I. So ideally, I should have been going into pre-units, which is you go into pre-unit and then standard 1. And my brother should have been going into standard 1. That's the age at which we were. But the closest school we could get at the time, this is sort of going into mid-January, was a school very close to home. Now this school, and don't laugh, we ended up being the only people who wore underwear and wore shoes. And everyone used to be very fascinated.
Sorry, you're the only people who wore underwear and wore shoes
yes.
in
people
the school.
People used to follow us to the loo just to, why is that guy wearing many clothes? But what ended up happening was this guy says, no, I cannot take these boys into standard 1 because they didn't have a pre-unit. Because standard 1 is taught in Luo, in the Luo, which is the local language. Now, we didn't speak the language. So he said, sorry, I can't take your boys. So my mom, being who she is, she said, fine, then take them to standard 2. And the guy said, no. First of all, this guy is 5, this other one is 6. At standard 2 in Kenya, you're supposed to be around 7 years old, going into 8 years old. I said, obviously, I can't take these boys in. So mom said, no, they can actually handle the coursework. The guy totally says it can't be done. So my mom says, test them then. Takes 2 brown envelopes. And I remember this story very clearly, 30-something years later. Takes 2 envelopes, writes on one of them 5 times 5, the other one writes 6 times 3. I can't remember which one I got. So very quickly just did it. My brother did his, and the girl was just absolutely blown away. He's like, wow, 5-year-old boy can actually do this. So if I take them to standard 2. So went all the way through school, 2.5, 3 years younger than everyone else. It was never any issue.
And you never struggled in school. I mean, were you picked on because you were younger than everybody else? Did you?
Well, I was smaller, but my brother was bigger, so he always protected me.
Okay.
And for some reason, the coursework was never that difficult. And I cannot tell you why. Maybe it's because I read a lot, because for me, books have always been a fascination. Always in the top 2, top 3, top 5. That's partly where the resentment sometimes came from, is this new boy who's come in and sort of shoots up to the top of the class type thing. But to me, it was never an issue. I mean, it wasn't anything. But yeah, that's cool.
Your mum was big on education. I mean, she really wanted you and your brother to get the best possible education. Give me some background in terms of your family background.
Yeah, my mom. I grew up in a single parent household with my mom, because they got divorced ages ago when we were still, I think, toddlers, whatever it is. My mom was, well, still is big on education. First, she teaches at university. But it wasn't so much that she was big on education, which she was, is that the environment at home enabled you to indulge in it. So there's always books around and that sort of thing. And that's now what my house looks like. If you ever to see what my sitting room looks like. In fact, my wife sometimes gets annoyed because of how many books I leave lying around, and magazines and things like those. And my mom was very keen on ensuring that we go to the best schools. You know, so wherever we went, because she was a civil servant, which is why she was moving around a lot. So whenever we ended up, and that the school I was telling you about, we were only there for a year, and we were then able to transfer to a school called Victoria Primary School. It's a private school in Kisumu. I came back to Nairobi at some point, but it was always to try and get
where
to
more
the best.
people wore underwear.
Well, at least not that everyone wore underwear and everyone wore shoes. So we were sort of the rubes now at the time. But anyway, so yes, she was very keen on ensuring that we get the best education we possibly can. And at the time in the 80s and 90s, because almost everyone went to public schools, and even private schools are very close quality-wise to public schools. So you actually ended up interacting with people who are still my best friends still today, 20, 30 years later. But that was a huge influence in terms of how we ended up, my brother and I.
What does your brother do, or what did your brother end up going to do?
My brother's in aviation, but from the ground level, so
Right.
he makes sure the planes run on time, which sounds like a dictator thing, but that's literally what he does, make sure the planes run. So now he works for the UN.
You mentioned that the kids you went to school with are still some of your best friends till today. Are they also in positions of interesting positions, either in government or business? Have you found that it's been
They are in
helpful?
positions of influence. You know, the thing is, the surprising thing is that you never think about that when you're making friends. You know, the one thing I'm thankful for actually is the fact that the friends I ended up making, especially in high school, were people who, we had fun obviously, but they're people who got focused. So for me, and I'm very good at being very lazy, and they're the people who end up pushing you and so no, we have to do this and we have to study and whatever it is. And they're now in fairly senior positions. I won't mention who they are, but in extremely senior positions in banking and in consumer goods and things like those. Then other people who are not necessarily in the tightest circle of friends are now in parliament and they're senators and things like that. But it was never part of any plan, to be honest. It was never
But
part
it
of...
never is. I mean, I remember my dad telling me that when he was doing photography when he was in high school in Tanzania, and he used to take his little scooter and drop his pictures off at the Tanganyika Standard. One of the cub reporters there was a guy called Benjamin Kappa, and he used to give him a lift. Every morning in the scooter, he'd pick him up and drop Ben off at the newspaper offices when he went to drop his pictures.
That's
and
the thing.
Mkapa ended up being the president of Tanzania.
But you know what? Let me tell you what, Salim. The problem right now is because this has happened to us, right? In our generation and in your dad's generation, the problem is that parents now are starting to get to the point where they're trying to make sure the children have got the most influential friends. So child is 5 years old, 6 years old, and you're trying to make sure you're friends with the minister's son, and it's not just in
Lot
Kenya,
more pressure.
everywhere. And that was the environment in which we grew up. So you don't do things for the pressure of what it will do for you in the future. It's just because it's a nice thing to do.
We'll be right back with Wallace Kantai. We're going to talk about life after school. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're here with Wallace Kantai. Wallace, we were talking in the break about life after school. You've worked in almost every sector, from NGOs to government to corporate. What was the one that you enjoyed the most?
It's perhaps what I'm doing now, and I'm not just saying that because what journalism does, television, because sometimes you do get recognized by people, is that you end up doing all these things at the same time because you will meet people, you will try and do stories, and what this has also done for me is opened up the world of people coming to you and saying, can you come and moderate sessions for us? So all the different places that I've been able to do that for is just meeting people. And I think people are very fascinating things. The other day, it was at the Africa Development Bank conference in Kigali. And so we went off for this dinner. It was a little tiny dinner. And so went off, sat there, and sort of mixing and mingling. So this guy comes up. He's like, hi. So what's going on? So he's like, no, just waiting for the dinner to start. I go to chatting and he says, I'm the finance minister of Zimbabwe. I go, huh? And so he sat there. So I'm actually the one who was entertaining him. And these guys then came in and their financiers, like, you guys need to give money to Zimbabwe. And they actually ended up starting to make a deal. And I was like, wow, could actually do that in 2 minutes. And so that's, to me, is a thing that I find fascinating. But it's not just at that level, but also at any other level where people are making a living and doing interesting things. For me, this ties all of them up.
What was the most frustrating job that you ever had?
I'll answer that in a different way because I thought it was frustrating at the time, but some of the skills I use today are because of the job I held then. And this is my very first job after university, which is working for a guy. I won't say the company, I'll just say the guy, because he is one of the most fascinating human beings I've ever met. His name was Yazim Nanje, who you probably know.
This was ISP Kenya. I can say the name.
Kenya.
I mean,
No, it wasn't so much hiding the name as it wasn't the company as it is the guy.
Yeah.
Yaz was Yazim, you know, and he's unique, right? And he was truly a genius in terms of just how he thinks. He started one of the first ISPs in East Africa and that sort of thing. He ended up getting in trouble with the government because they wanted to take the company off of him, and he came back. Now, at that comeback is when we went to see him, because I was in a student organization called ISEC in university, so we used to work a lot with companies. So I met him and make a presentation. He says, no, come work for me. And I was just finishing university. And so I went to work for him, and he is a pain to work for, just his personality, you know, and he's going to be in your face and this sort of thing. But the skills I ended up learning from working there for about 4 years are the skills I still use till today. Whether it's a skill of interacting with people, whether it's a skill of even just writing your press releases and things like those. So at the time I was I actually resigned from him twice. Resign, come back, resign, come back. It was that sort of love-hate relationship. But I don't think I've learned more than I learned in the 4 years at ISP Kenya. So it's frustration on one hand, but it actually worked out eventually on the other.
In 2002, you were part of putting together what they call the National Vision Project,
Yes.
which was the vision for Kenya to go forward, which everybody signed on to. Government, corporates, the whole country seemed to have signed up on that. What happened to that? I mean, we're now in, a decade, more than a decade on. Is the vision still alive? Do you see any progress in all the work that you did?
Short answer is that vision eventually ended up being Vision 2030. That's what people don't realize about the National Vision Project at the Institute of Economic Affairs. And again, it's a strange story because I was always involved in the IEA from back in university, and it's back to what I was telling you about never doing what you're supposed to be doing at the time. So we always ended up going for IEA meetings. So we were dragooned and told, guys, come, and you're trying to put together this sort of thinking. And it wasn't to do a vision at the time because they had done what they call the scenarios, which was a very interesting project about projecting where Kenya would be if certain things happened in certain ways. Now that became very prophetic because one of the things they predicted is if you don't do political change the way it should be done, we could end up in trouble, including getting into civil strife, and that's what happened in 2007, 2008. So everyone came back and said, oh, by the way, we need to see what happened with the scenarios. But those scenarios, they then thought at the time that we need to move the scenarios on. So what do we do? So let's get young people together. At the time, I think I was 24, 25. Let's get young people together. Let's hear from them what they have. Ended up becoming a very big project. We went off on all sorts of offsites and retreats and things like those. So the document that we then came up with, which had social pillars, political pillars, and all that sort of thing, was one of the genesis documents for Vision 2030. And again, the people who were in that project are in very senior positions today. So again, all these things just sort of end up tying up. So,
but do you get frustrated, kind of, now being so close to talking to people and being on the ground and watching what are effectively monumental screw-ups
yes,
by government, not just this government, but previous governments as well. Does that frustrate you with all the work that you guys put in when you were in your 20s to try and take the country forward and not seeing that change, especially politically?
For me, there's an element of frustration, yes, and I'll come back to that. But again, visions are a product of good naivety. You know, so you have to put together best case scenarios, which will get hammered by reality, and it always happens in any such things. So on the one hand, no, I sort of expected this to happen. But on the other hand, what frustrates me is not so much that the screw ups happen, is that these guys know what they need to do to actually take the country, take the continent forward. And the classic example was the first time I ever traveled out of Kenya was in 1997 with Isaac, and we went to South Africa. And we were fascinated just by the road system. 1997 is in the middle of the Moi years in Kenya, and it was everything had just broken down. You could hardly drive on any road in any part of the country for more than 100 meters without encountering this humongous monumental pothole, you know. And so things were breaking down, and we go there, and we were asking ourselves, is President Moi comes to South Africa, goes to Europe, goes to all these sorts of places all the time. What does he see and what does he bring back with him? You know, in terms of what you carry in your head. Doesn't he look at this and say, I wish Kenya would be like this? And to us, that was always a frustrating thing. So for me, I look at the guys who are in power today and in the past. These are the people who are the very top. They're the very elites, and they've been elites for decades in this country. Meaning they have the ideas, they have the smarts, they have the financial resources, they have the contacts to actually be able to make this country work and to make this continent work. Problem is that sometimes it's a fight between one side of your head, which is the logical side of your mind, and the other side, which is everything that ails us, which is tribalism and power games and short-term thinking and things like those. And for me, the fight has always been to try and get these guys to think on this one side.
It's the short-term thinking throughout the continent, and it's often the case, unfortunately, also with businesses, that it is short-term thinking rather than looking at it for a 50, 100-year thing, which is what worries me, for example, with the Chinese influence in Africa. They think in hundreds of years. They don't think short-term.
The Chinese have bought up copper reserves. I was reading it the other day. Chinese have bought up copper reserves that I think will serve them for about 20 or 30 years. So they buy copper to the level where, in Kenya at least, people are digging up copper cable, cutting people's phone wires and cutting off electricity wires to transport them off to China. Now, the Chinese are not taking them and building with them. Chinese are simply putting them in a warehouse, a huge warehouse complex, which is the fact that by the time they need the copper, it's sitting in China. Now, with us, we're cutting off our own nose to spite our face. And to me, that's
what do
where
they need copper for?
Because they need to build the economy. Everyone needs to build the economy. Now, for us, we sit there, and again, it's this. I mean, you and I love vehicles. We love cars, right? So then I went to the Porsche showroom, opened a showroom in Nairobi, and obviously, as a man, I drool and drool and drool. And my wife's voice was at the back of my head. Is that, don't look at this car, don't look at this car. Because I could very easily say, fine, I'll sort out how to buy this car. I'll go to the bank and finance it, whatever it is, pull out savings, and I'll drive it, and I'll be very happy because I'm driving a Porsche. But in 5 years, I'll be able to drive that Porsche, but without necessarily having to kill the feature.
Yeah, to go through the stress.
What our leaders are doing is they look at that Porsche, get very hungry for it, and figure out how to kill a company, kill an economy, kill a country, so they can drive it or fly a private jet or have a villa in France or whatever it is. But they liquidate our entire, or go and mortgage it for the sake of something so small and so in passing that you actually don't understand that sort of thinking.
We'll be right back with Wallace Kantai talking about other passions in life. Stay with me. Welcome back. I'm still here with Wallace Kantai. We were talking about passions. Wallace, outside of work, outside of, you have a very busy life. You seem to spend a lot of time in front of the TV and working, not watching TV. Other passions in life. You talked to me about cars, which is one of them. What else do you have in your life that you would love to do? Planes was something that you mentioned as well.
I'm starting to sound like an African dictator. I want a private jet, but anyway. The biggest passion I have outside of family is, strangely enough, reading. Okay. That's what I spend most of my time doing, is just reading one thing after the other, after the other, after the other. It truly is a passion. It sounds, people don't believe it is, but that's what it is. I mean, I'd rather read than do anything else.
But reading what? I mean, what do you read? You read novels? You read biographies?
I realize I read very little fiction. Because I find fiction is not as interesting as real life. So it's typically your biographies, history books, memoirs type things. So I've got bookshelves upon bookshelves upon bookshelves of them. And you'll ask me, how come it's not on a Kindle? No, I believe in reading real books. Reading is perhaps the biggest. Music, I never fail to have my iPod with me in the car, wherever it is.
What do you listen to? I mean, you said you were a big choir fan for
70s, 80s, and
different-
90s. We can get into a discussion of music for the next 6 hours. Michael Jackson is the greatest musician who ever lived. There will never be
Michael
another.
Jackson is my favorite
Yes,
musician.
there
as
will
well, so,
never ever
so
be
yes,
another.
Yes, on Michael.
Now, let me get
So there we go. So Michael
Listen,
Jackson.
something you haven't done.
Okay.
I have done a duet with Lionel Richie.
You've done what? A duet with Lionel
With
Richie?
Lionel Richie.
No
Yes.
way.
Washington, D.C. in October 2012.
No way.
It was September 2012.
Right.
Went off there, and what happened was Emirates was launching a flight to Washington, so they invited us and said, hey, come along, and so we went along. So they had a concert with Lionel. It was a little small room because just sort of their customers and things like those.
Right.
So we all went up and were singing along. So the famous song, the one that has got the little Swahili stuff, Jambo Nipe Senti Moja, all night long.
Okay.
So I'm singing every single word. So Lionel sort of is
Looking at
someone
you.
Someone is singing very badly. Who the hell is it? But anyway, so he comes along and then gives me the microphone.
Yeah.
Like, okay, fine. So I sang. So I sort of sang the whole thing and sort of doing the microphone back and forth. Problem is I do not have a video of it. Because the guy gave my camera to take a photo of it, was fascinated by the concert. So the idiot didn't take a single photo, no video exists.
So
of
I
that
don't
moment.
believe you then.
I
don't
sang
see
a
the
duet
evidence,
with
I
Lionel
don't
Richie.
believe
So
you.
now I have. Then what happened was, so he finishes his set and he took off. I said, no, I gotta get a photo with Lionel. So I ran off after him. So I'm running and I sort of couldn't find him. So eventually caught up with him. And so I was like, Lionel. It's like, hey, where did you know that? He's like, no, I have all your music and stuff. It's like, do you mind if I get a photo of you? So gave it to one of his guys and the guy was taking a photo. So Lionel puts his hand on my chest. Puts his hand on my chest. So obviously, first thing I do is go upload the photo on Facebook. So instead of everyone getting fascinated and really impressed by the fact that sang with Lionel Richie, is what is happening on your chest.
I love that. So I'll tell you another one. With my father was absolutely had no clue about music. Did not have.
The great
Couldn't-
Moamin didn't know anything about music.
Did not know anything about music. Two very funny. So I went on Desert Island Discs,
Yes.
which was with this Sue
Yeah.
Lawley's great program in the
Yeah.
UK, where they got celebrities in to
Of
talk
course,
about
yeah.
their music. So again, he didn't have a clue. So he asked Michael Burke, who was the BBC correspondent at that time, to help him with this music selection. So they played whatever music it was, and then he finished the interview, came out of the studio, and screaming at Burke. And Burke's like, what's the problem? He said, you said this piece was by Mozart, and he's like, yeah. So he said, well, who's this bastard Diageo then? So he had absolutely no clue on that. And the second one, which I will never forgive him for, is the recording of "We Are the World." The
Yes,
song came
of
about
course.
because of his
his work, yeah.
pictures and everything else. So he's in Los Angeles, and prior to when they were just putting together the song, and he meets with Quincy, and I said, so who did you meet there? He said, well, we went to this diner, and Quincy Jones was there, and Kenny Rogers was there, and then he said, we were sitting at this diner, and this guy comes, and I was about to give him my order. I thought he was the waiter or the busboy. I was about to give him my order, and he sat down. And he had a torn shirt and torn jeans, and I thought, who's this guy coming? I said, no, there's some homeless guy. And then everybody started calling him the boss. They started referring to him as the
no
boss.
way.
And I'm like, that was Bruce Springsteen.
Jeez,
and he's
man.
like, Bruce who? Wallace, the show is called The Scoop. So I need to ask you for a scoop, something that nobody preferably knows about, or very few people.
This will get me into the most amount of trouble ever. I did not properly graduate from the University of Nairobi. Which, now you've made me say it, which is why I couldn't apply for the Rhodes Scholarship. What happened was, there was a problem with my marks at university. In the very last days when you're going to sign off on things and everything, because there was this American lecturer who came in, and what he ended up doing was messing a lot of people up. So by the time we straightened it out, and it was eventually straightened out, he had taken off the graduation already happened. Now, one of my aunts, that was one of her biggest regrets before she passed away, to see me in a cap and gown and things like those. So I didn't do it.
So you didn't actually, even in spite of it being sorted out, you didn't actually...
I didn't actually go for the
go for the
graduation ceremony.
graduation.
I just saw graduation ceremonies that and in Kenya you don't go up and shake hands. It's a call by name. Odiambo, Otieno, and you also stand up like little meerkats. But anyway, never actually wore a cap and gown to graduate in history and political science from the University of Nairobi. But, well, I have my degree. But that's why I didn't apply for the roads, which is silly of me because, well,
It was sorted out. You should
it
have
was
applied
sorted
for it.
out. But yeah,
And you can still go and
that
get
is
your
a scoop.
picture.
I can't believe I say that out loud. If it ever never gets me a job again, it's your fault.
Thank you, Wallace.
Oh,
And
yeah,
that's
no.
the scoop with Wallace Kantai. Join me again next week when I'll be talking to yet another great African personality. From me and the entire team of the scoop here in Nairobi, Kenya, thanks for watching. Wallace, asante sana. Thank
Cheers,
you
man.
very much for coming,
All
man.
right.
It was
Anytime.
really interesting. I hope you enjoyed it half as much as I
Yeah, I
did. That
did.
was a really great conversation.
Thank you very much, Salim.
I know, I really enjoyed that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
all right.
Thank you.